Before I get going, this is obviously going to contain topics that revolve around the 2.5 story quest, so if you're not done with yet, then go away and do the quest. This is a spoiler warning. How close have you been to death in your life? A car accident, shot, overdose?
Ever gone mountain biking? What do you want to be when you grow up? What's the right tip?
Death is the one thing we desire to never meet, and most of the time when we say we wish for it, it's not usually a genuine want for life to end. It's to end the pain. There's various ways we experience pain too, and typically for us, we want to do what we can to minimize it as much as possible. Pain can be growth, but it can be an anchoring hindrance, or at worst, a crippling affliction. Wuthering Waves tackles this idea in many areas, but is seen more precisely in 2.5's story and Phrolova. So let me lay things out so that hopefully you can understand what I'm talking about. The focus of the video is to connect Phrolova's experiences and story to real-life NDEs or near-death experiences, and how she demonstrates many of the real-life outcomes which tend to happen as a result of these experiences. This is to hopefully help us better understand why and how Phrolova sees the world as it is, and what is causing her to drive towards a seemingly impossible goal with her dead friends and family. This isn't going to just be out of my ass too. Much like many of my other videos that I do, studies and articles will accompany Phrolova's dissection. In this case, the readings are these: Near-Death Experiences and the Change of Worldview in Survivors of Sudden Cardiac Arrest by Hans Zingmark and Annette Granberg Axel from the Department of Internal Medicine in Halmstad and Lund University in Sweden. Near-Death Experiences, Clinical Implications by Bruce Grayson, who, by the way, is one of the core people who have thoroughly looked into NDEs and the facets of it for over 45 years, and this 360-page doctorate thesis by Erica Pratt from the University of Northampton. It compiles and aims to identify after effects of NDEs, how they were lived through, and how it helps or hinders psychological well-being. Their findings on NDEs are fascinating to read about, and I think it will explain a lot. Instead of doing splits of Wuthering Waves and real-life academic talk, I'll combine the two so that the topics are more easily connected and you won't need to remember as much. I'll be hitting on three main points that I think strongly link to NDE experiences: her experience of dying, her viewpoint shift from dying, and the after effects of it. These 3 points will hopefully help explain where she comes from and why she's done what she has, while also showing you how her experiences are in many ways astonishingly close to how things play out in reality. Get coffee and comfy, since this is a dive into how Phrolova's experience with death is closer to reality than you may think. Phrolova and Wuthering Waves makes NDEs as an anchor point so interesting because they allow for fiction to be conduits for real things, while exploring ideas that may go past them. Phrolova's experience with death is what kicks everything off. It is this death that changes her forever, because she at this point becomes living proof that the veils between living and dying is in one way an illusion. She gains many different kinds of insight from her death, outside of the obvious trauma of the aftermath of her village being burned to ash. In real life, NDEs could be seen as real-life awakenings for us in the same vein as Phrolova. There's a few different ways people experience and have outlined their NDE. The most common way we tend to know of this are of the reports of tunnels with lights at the end, or anything similar to that outlining idea. Beams of light, a bright enveloping light, warming light, etc. But there are other ways people experience dying. My personal wish is with my head between someone's thighs. But according to Hans and Annette's study, another experience is being in between dimensions, as seen from the participants Anders, Bertil, Sven, and John. This dimension was peaceful and warm, with distinct clarity, and in fact, this in-between otherworldly dimension is another somewhat common thing that people will feel. A feeling of being at peace and extremely aware of every single thing there. It's both otherworldly and just as or more than real. However, that isn't always the case, as others may also experience the opposite of it. A deep void, apparitions of the deep marred by screams, shrilling silence, and hellish or barren landscapes. Both of these ideas are mentioned within the compiled doctoral thesis on NDEs by Erica Pratt, but these specific ideas come from PMH Atwater, another foundational scholar in the research of NDEs and the scopes of it. But even going as far back as 1983, we get Gallup pollings on NDEs which give us insight. Bruce Grayson's outlining of this mentions that 32% of them were peaceful, with a range of 1% to 20% being painful and hellish. In Phrolova's case, we can gather interesting parallels that mirror reality in both scenarios. Her cutscene gives an inclination of the harrowing cries of her people, which did happen for her, and that mirrors the negative NDE experience. But when you unlock Intimacy 5, you get an explanation of how everything happened to Phrolova after she died. She quite literally mirrors the peacefulness and otherworldly dreamlike nature that people describe in real life. Quote, "She had indeed had a very long dream, a beautiful dream granted by the beyond." End quote. She was in the real beyond, which would be like the near-death state, and it wasn't until she took Hecate's hand did she come back to her burning village. Hecate is also another parallel, as this is sometimes a common thing as well, where a person or entity is the reason you end up coming back to your corporeal body. It's also more chilling to think about too, because she is in most likely the most vulnerable kind of state. It's new and emotional, and since the bodies are freshly deceased, the cries and reaching for the wanting to live echo even more poignantly as they become the hands which birth her anew. Bruce Grayson mentions that it's common to stay around observing around your body and reaching for loved ones in hopes of reaching them. Phrolova is almost a step-by-step direct characterization of what near-death experiences lay out. Additionally, when doing research, I found this channel, New Thinking Aloud with Jeffrey Mishlove. This channel has done a lot of discussions on NDEs, and I've watched maybe 3 or 4 videos from this channel during my dive, and some of the videos include talks with Bruce Grayson, one of the leading foundational voices on NDEs. In this video, he talks about how you experience NDEs, and one of the aspects can be life reviews, which you may know as the life flashing before my eyes trope. It's seemingly closer than we think.
Yeah, that's always sounded like bullshit to me too, but it's not.
And this part of the video was fascinating to hear about. He talks about another book regarding NDEs and how Tom Sawyer, during his life review, he was reliving beating someone up. But it wasn't just that, it was also him experiencing that violence through the other person's eyes and feeling that simultaneously.
The man, being intoxicated, reached his hand inside the window and slapped Tom across the face. And that was too much for this hot-headed teenager. So he got out of the truck and started beating the man up. They left him a bloody pulp on the media strip and then drove off. When he had his life review, he said he remembered it all through his own eyes, feeling the adrenaline rush and the rage, and also, at the same time, through the eyes of the Trump man, feeling the humiliation of being beaten up by this young punk, and feeling his nose getting bloody and his teeth going through his lower lip. And Tom said to me later, that really convinced him that we're not separate individuals. We're all interconnected.
I'm bringing this up because if we connect that idea of experiencing through others' eyes, the life review, and the experience of dying, Phrolova has experienced these things on a more intimate level. In fact, she's even talked about it. In the earlier times where you see her talking with her village, she points this out.
Aeschylus, over all these years, each of you has spoken to me in contradictions. Words of surrender, of perseverance, of fear, of pleading. Fate is fickle, ever ready to devour. Death comes swiftly without warning. And in its shadow, I have seen you at peace, in fear, in sorrow, and in madness.
She has the stunning privilege, now being above death, of veering into others' lives and seeing how they are in their moments of death. We're also aware of her ability to resurrect, and it brings into question if part of her torturous life is knowing that she has severely hurt and even traumatized unfathomable amounts of people beyond living. Is all of that energy of trauma with others being brought out through dying as life reviews, but probably worse? To me, I would imagine so, and she even tells us or ponders the idea as if she's had the life reviews from some of her lines.
Life is as fragile as trembling leaves caught in winter's breath, their quiet cries swallowed by the wind. The more fleeting, the harder to judge if our choices were ever right. To find meaning in them, one must first walk a path that stretches into forever.
She mentions too that this pain keeps her anchored to reality in her profile experience, treading through woes. It makes you wonder if it's not just the physical acts and experience of dying and reviving, but the near-death experience and deeper emotional ones that hit when in between. Again, Phrolova is touching on the realities of real NDEs, but because of the uniqueness of Phrolova and Wuthering Wave's world, we explore dynamics, portrayals, or questions that we can't necessarily answer with certainty in our current living bodies. Phrolova can, and her experience with dying and others' death gives a depressing view of NDEs through her tragic experiences, while simultaneously proposing if these experiences await some of us when we're whispers away from death.
Always reminding you of the shortness of our days and the regrets we can't mend.
One of the other areas that we see aptly is Frolova's point of view. We see distinct areas in where we see her as a person, but the shift in viewpoints can be stemmed back to the root of it all, her death and awakening. We got to see her life in 3 distinct eras, with 2 of them being shown more in depth. We got to see her during her village as just a normal girl with a passion for music. We saw her after the tragedy in her elegy outfit, as well as exploring around the world looking for solutions. And lastly, our most seen version of her, post-Phraxidus. Each one of these shows a different point in Phrolova's outlook, if not in the contents of what is being shown to us, then in the tone. Village Phrolova, for example, is not the same as post-death Phrolova, and as such would most certainly have different approaches to how life is seen. One of the biggest studied things for NDEs is the perspective shift. What happens to these people once they have seen past their life in this existence? A lot, actually. Perspectives on life and death, ideas and beliefs about what happens after we die, world-shifting lenses which change how they see the physical world they end up being anchored back to. All of these things change drastically and link heavily with how you approach living. You see all of these things in Phrolova, so let me show you. Phrolova makes it very clear to us, the audience, and Rover that she has seen things that Rover and others cannot fully understand, living beyond death.
The world is but a symphony of resonating frequencies. Humans may fall to be tacit discords, and tacit discords may rise again as humans. There is no divide between us. I have long erased that line. So can everyone else.
You never understood the true value of human life.
Nor have you stepped beyond the boundary that death has placed upon the human soul.
Her perspective on life and death is one that nobody else will be able to see through her eyes. Well, give or take Rover depending on if they keep their memories, which is still debatable. But virtually nobody else can reach her point of view because she not only has gone beyond life and death, she has the ability to recreate some form of it through how she manipulates frequencies. She, as a singular personal anomaly through the circumstances of her awakening, has the ability to literally see what is beyond death and in a way toy with aspects of it. That means she has not just blind conviction behind her views because she is a literal product of it. She has clear certainty of it. In the real world, people will get these ideas too. In this 360-page doctorate thesis by Erica Pratt at the University of Northampton, she mentions, quote, NDERs will also describe how people see them as self-righteous because of their keen sense of morality, end quote. This demonstrates that there's confidence that is gained and is different from before their experiencing of death, and shows how others perceive their views. This idea is also mentioned by Sven, one of the participants in Hans and Aneth's study. Quote, "This knowledge, I know this exists, but I was only briefly there and I cannot return in my own control. But definitely something else exists, which is not this in any way, and this has changed my view of what happens after this." End quote. This sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Thousands of paths, surely one will lead me back to them. And even if I'm wrong, I fear not starting over. I've done it time and time again.
What meaning is there in chasing something that's neither realistic nor attainable?
I know they're there.
Bruce Grayson's reports also point this out under his positive effects. This entire section right here is pointing out the comparative differences of other NDE studies and showing how NDERs have reduced fears of death, higher belief in life post-mortem, increased value of love, heightened spiritual purpose, and many other things. All of that leads into the reshaping of their new worldview. These things go hand in hand extremely tightly with Phrolova. She displays these things to some degree. Things like her love for her village probably grew exponentially after seeing how fast things can go awry. I mean, isn't her entire goal not one that is in part built for the love of those she wants to see again? She cherishes her village and the memories with them, and I think it's in part how she can display her love for others through the remembrance of them. The whole sonorosphere is dedicated to her village, so she can see and remember them. Her music piece is in mourning remembrance for her village. She additionally shows the increased value of love too through her attachment to Rover in only one meeting post-death. Her notebook really shows how she really enjoyed Rover's presence and ability to listen and understand. That was probably her first real connection she's had since her revival, and why she's so hurt by the fact that Rover severed the connection she thought she had with them. Rover showed her that memories, no matter how precious, are negotiables and okay to throw away. And if we interpret remembrance as one of the ways Phrolova shows love to others, it's one of the biggest betrayals to her.
I won't wait anymore.
But I have one more thing for this point, which really puts in perspective Phrolova as a character through NDEs as the lens. Bruce Grayson points out in his literature review for the Virginia Medical Institute that NDEs, suicide, and evolving views on death are connected. He points out that after NDE, there are some out there who end up having a positive view of death, a romanticization of it because of what it did to them. They were granted a moment of otherworldly peace, an absolving of anxieties, and a reunification of loved ones. But funny enough, NDEs tend to provide an opposite effect of actual suicidal intent. This is because of how it recontextualizes life and purpose and allows you to detach your personal failures and losses and increase your fulfillment of living. This shows how NDEs have a paradoxical kind of nature to them on how it shapes outlook on life. Phrolova is a prime example of how, again, Wuthering Waves takes concepts and extends them or flips them. Phrolova is representative of that paradoxical idea which is reflected in the outcomes seen in real people, but twisted. Instead of dying and coming back feeling that fulfillment of life or a detachment of failures and lower desire for wanting death, she isn't granted that. She's more attached to her failures and her losses than ever before, and she values life as a whole so little that she's willing to sacrifice others and herself because the fulfillment of her purpose is linked to death in the beyond. This, as a result, pushes her more towards an increase in suicidal intent, not because she's looking at death necessarily in a romanticized way. She's beyond death, so if anything, she's somewhat indifferent to the act itself. more so because it's the only way in which she can find some inkling of release and find herself more fulfilled, aligning with the positives mentioned in Grayson's literary review. Death is the only way in which she can feel more alive because the beyond is where her main purpose lies. Phrolova exudes twisted serendipitous harmony with reality through her changes in viewpoint, and it's in part what makes her so much more than just a tragic figure performing on a stage. The last major thing I want to talk about is how Phrolova and NDE After Effects are noticeably close. Trauma can be a byproduct from these, and I think NDEs can give answers which help get to the root of Phrolova as a character. NDEs, as I've already laid out, can be tremendously momentous parts of a person's life. As I said previously, it shifts the person's entire perspective on life and death, which also affects so many other facets of them. As such, one of the prominent things that comes from this is the struggle in relationships. Bruce Grayson points out that, quote, NDERs sometimes feel distress if the NDE conflicts with their previously held beliefs and attitudes. They are often afraid of rejection or ridicule if they discuss this fear with friends or professionals, end quote. When you keep reading, there are more details that point out two stances which negatively affect the NDER. The first stance is the avoidance of the person due to the change in how they see life, leading to obvious loneliness and any kind of negatives that arise from that. This includes both professional and family and friends. The second stance is seeing the person as more than human, putting too much emphasis on potential positives one may have seen in various depictions of NDEs, like thinking they have supernatural powers or healing abilities. This leads to literal unattainable expectations, and when that person cannot meet that naturally, they are discarded through no fault of their own. Phrolova is someone that reflects these things pretty keenly in my opinion. The biggest part that shows her experience in dealing with these after effects is when we're seeing her different explorations among Solaris in search for solutions. Because she is living proof of an afterlife and thus has undeniable conviction through the fact that she can prove it, you see both of these outcomes. She's avoided by people when she goes into town because her questions outline her as an enemy of humanity as seen in the town. Conversely, she was also put on a pedestal from the people in what seems to be Renacida and was exploited there. And she was, ironically, used as a means to an end for these scientists because she actually did get powers from her death. If you ask me, exploiting her powers of dying and reviving for the pursuit of immortality is much worse than just being dropped from not meeting lofty expectations. But this again ties back into Rover and Phrolova's previous relationship and why it was valued so much. She was able to find someone who didn't reject her or have some kind of fear when talking to them like others. It was a genuine connection which will sometimes go missing after death because of the change it does to you. An interview outlined in Pratt's thesis gives insight on this after effect more clearly. Quote, relationships seem more intense but only last a short time. I have no problem communicating but have found that others cannot accept things as they are. I feel everyone lives in a fantasy world and I am the realist outcast, end quote. We also can see two other after effects in Phrolova too, PTSD and disassociation. Bruce Grayson mentions under his PTSD section that, quote, NDEs may lead to typical PTSD symptoms like recurrent, intrusive recollections of the event, recurrent distressing dreams of the event, diminished interest in previously important activities, estrangement from others, and a sense of foreshortened future, end quote. Phrolova definitely shows some of these things and they vary in intensity too, like how we see phantoms of them guiding us. But the most notable ones are when they interfere completely and she is sucked into her world despite what's happening around her. At worst too, it ties into her powers and has really big effects on everything in that area as seen in the cutscene that leads to her pulling Rover into the beyond. Additionally, because of her revelations on death, she portrays again a flipped idea of a sense of foreshortened future seen in people with PTSD. These are feelings of hopelessness of what your future will bring because you expect death to cut you down before you reach what you want. It's an inability to see your future. Phrolova demonstrates this not through the fact that she's expecting death, but because death isn't even an option for her. Her future stretches indefinitely. So what do you imagine for a life in infinity? Since she's suffered life being cut abruptly in front of her and has experienced the mundanity of life for herself, it's no wonder she fits so well into a sense of foreshortened future. This also ties into the disassociation aspect too. This is the disconnection of perception, thoughts, feelings, and identity from common conventional awareness as surmised by Grayson. For starters, her profile lays out this disconnection to reality, and that the only way she can seemingly be attached to it is through pain. Across countless eras, she's subjected herself to experiments, enduring her own decomposition and rebirth. Pain made her feel anchored to reality, yet she could only approach the past through the gaps of pain. This again is also seen in many of the parts where Phrolova disconnects with what's happening in front of her and is literally just absorbed into her world and the beyond. It's also seen too with how she becomes emotionally detached regarding how she views those around her.
Love, sincerity, compassion, trust. What you and your cronies hold dear is but a jest to the Fraccidus. No bond lasts forever. Without true loyalties, there can be no betrayal, no deceit. I no longer buy into such illusions.
Phrolova's after effects are things that we see, but I think they are things we don't fully understand the depth to. When approaching, seeing, and connecting these things through the lens of NDEs, I think this helps add more texture and realism to the deathless musician who grimly caresses our interest in answering what it means for us to truly die. This bigger video took a long while to make, but I have to say, I'm more than happy and proud of it. I hope you all found it interesting or insightful, and I would greatly appreciate sharing, liking, and subbing. If you have any NDE experience, did Phrolova speak to you at all? As always, thank you for letting me take your time, and be safe out there.